Thank you, Andrew. It's a privilege and an honor for me to be with you all this morning and to, as I discovered, be the inaugural lecturer for the auxiliary lecture for this afternoon. Our gospel reading this morning is from the Gospel of Matthew, the 13th chapter, beginning with the first verse. Listen for God's word. The same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the lake. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let everyone with ears listen." This is the word of the Lord. Now, all of us are probably familiar with this parable from Jesus. It's one of the better known ones. He actually goes on afterwards and gives an explanation of what the parable is all about. It's generally about the way in which different contexts bear on the outcomes from sowing the good news. And I could take some time now to analyze that text and try to relate it to contemporary life in the church today, and that would certainly be appropriate, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to follow Jesus' pattern, and I'm going to tell you a story. Not so long ago and not so far away, there was a family of architects and builders. The founder of the family envisaged a family home that was to be built on the crest of a hill overseeing a valley town. Succeeding generations had laid the foundation and had built upon that foundation, and the result was a great castle with high walls. You could look heavenward into the clear blue of the sky, and the clear light of reason could shine down within those walls. But they were high enough so they kept out the sight of the boisterous and the coarseness of the valley town below. At present, the castle was inhabited by a large and a diverse family who were the descendants of the founder. Now, the original plans for the castle were contained in what was called the Book of Design. The plans had been inspired by the vision of the founder of the family, but the actual plans themselves had been drawn by the first generation of his offspring. From the first days, no line had been changed from the original plans. Now, from time to time, as the family grew, there needed to be an added floor or perhaps an added wing, and the original plans were extrapolated or were interpreted by each generation in turn to meet those needs. And there was a general consensus that agreed that each edition did, as a matter of fact, follow in the spirit of the vision of the founder, though there were a few in the castle who lived in the most heavenward levels or in the farthest wings who had serious concerns about each new edition. They tended to believe that most of these changes were actually compromises to the vision of the founder and the Book of Design. The most recent constructions had been facades. They had the appearance of contemporary materials and techniques, and yet they actually had no real structural function for the castle. Now, to the current generation of this family, a son was born. His name was Alexander. He was tutored in the crafts and the lore of the family, and he came to revere the Book of Design. He vowed to be guided by it and it alone. And when he came of age, he took on the vocation of architect. Now, he was aware of the valley town below the castle, but he viewed it only at a distance. He knew of its exotic architectural styles. He knew that there lived in the town other architects and builders from distant lands. He knew of the Institute of Building Science that was located in the center of the town, where analysis of building principles and experiments took place with new building materials and techniques. But the Book of Design, in his view, was the only true and sufficient source of building principles. So he turned his back on the town. He judged it to be a place of passing fads, of conflicting authorities, and yes, even of architectural heresy. And still, he was dependent upon the valley town for his groceries, for his medical care, and for numerous other goods and services. Now, to the family, a second child was born, another son. His name was Connor. He also was trained in the building lore of the family, but very early on, he began to doubt the absolute validity of the Book of Design. As he aged, he spent more and more of his time down in the valley town. He was fascinated by its diversity and the intensity of its life. He was drawn by provocative murmurings about new and more glorious days of brilliant structural styles and innovative building techniques. He concluded that for the new to arrive, the old had to go. He became extremely dissatisfied with traditional styles and at those who maintained them. And so he left the castle of his father and took up residence in the valley town. He also changed his name. He adopted the name of Shiva and took upon himself the vocation of demolitions expert. He used his architectural knowledge to locate the weaknesses of traditional structures. He was able to place his charges at locations that could most effectively bring down the sturdiest of walls. He came to actively dislike all ancient designs. He became a stern critic of the castle of his father. He called the castle an odious blemish on the landscape. He disparaged the Book of Design. He spoke derisively of the vision of the founder of his family and argued that old structures might have some arcane interest to scholars, but they held no real importance to truly contemporary people. Old buildings were impediments to new structures that needed to be built. And so he went about his work, contracting to demolish old buildings, dreaming of new structures that would take their place. And yet he found himself dissatisfied with every new building that rose out of the rubble of his demolition work. Now, all the children of this particular generation were not boys. A daughter was born. Her name was Chloe. From her earliest childhood, she felt that the castle was too cold and confining for her spirit. Unlike Connor, she was not drawn to the valley town below, but rather to the forest and its glades, to fields of wildflowers surrounding the castle, to quiet wooded springs to which the forest animals would come to drink, to the sparkling streams that leapt down from the crest of the hill to the valley town below. As a child, she resisted learning the building lore of the family. She would often claim that there was more truth in the smell of a fresh rain than in the forest, or in the feel of new grass under her feet. And then there was more truth there than there was in any of the books of architectural design in the library of the castle. She also noticed that few of her teachers really expected her to master the building tradition or to become an architect herself. She was expected that she would simply require sufficient knowledge so that she would be an appropriate mate for an architectural suitor chosen from the town below. Neither of her brothers sought her opinion on any matters of significance, yet both expected her to follow their leads without question, but with enthusiasm. So it's not surprising that at the earliest opportunity, she also left the castle of her father. But she did not go to the valley town. Instead, she built a small home of sod and bark on the edge of the forest. The use of the materials from forest and field made it almost invisible unless a person was almost directly upon it. She became a potter and a poet, creating works of clay and works of words that were intended as explorations of the aesthetic spirit rather than as objects of utility. She lived a modest life, sharing her home and sometimes her bed with others, dispirited by the economy of the castle and the town. Her passionate poetry became a scandal to the family. Some in the valley town actually adopted her verses as anthems for protest movements that sprang up decrying the materialism of the day. And there was a last child born to this generation, another girl. Her name was Anne. She was instructed in the heritage of the family, the history of the castle, and the skills of the family trade. As the baby and as another girl, her technical potential was often underestimated, not only by her teachers, but by her family. Yet she had a disconcerting ability to suggest creative architectural solutions to problems, solutions which often took her elder brother quite by surprise. And though she recognized that no one held high architectural expectations for her, her own fascination with the integration of form and materials to create aesthetically appealing and functional space was sufficient to spur her to her own excellence in her studies. She was also drawn to the valley town. Her imagination was sparked by its architectural styles. Her mind was challenged and stimulated by the research done in the Institute of Building Science. She respected and cherished her heritage, but she did not worship it. She was intrigued by the possibilities of architectural innovation, but did not believe her heritage had to be discarded in order to make room for the new. She often visited her sister. They would lie together in grassy fields and make up stories about the cloud shapes in the blue sky above. They would bathe together in woodland ponds and splash and giggle like children. She spent many pleasurable hours learning as she watched her sister mold clay and mold words. She developed a respect for nature, but was also impressed by its underside, the thorn of the rose, the fang of the wolf, the talon of the hawk. She was also troubled by the uncritical way that her sister's poems were often used by others as passionate denunciations of both the town and the castle. But when she came of age, she chose to take up the vocation of architect, but she also left the castle of her father. She took with her a copy of the Book of Design that she had had since childhood. She also took many notebooks that she had filled while listening to the town scholars and structural scientists describing their investigations. And lastly, she took a collection of poems and clay figures that she had written and had shaped with the encouragement of her sister. She went neither to the valley town nor to the forest glen, but to the crest of a hill across the valley from her father's castle, where she laid the foundation for her own home. The form of the home was inspired by the vision of the founder of the family, yet the actual plans drew upon new architectural principles developed in the Towns Institute, upon aesthetic visions that she had shared with her sister. Her plans incorporated many diverse building styles into a single coherent design. She constructed her home using both materials from the forest and the fields and also newly introduced synthetic materials which possessed both strength and flexibility. The resulting structure was neither dominating nor obscure. It was clearly visible, but it seemed to grow naturally out of the bedrock upon which it was built. Its most striking feature was its east wall, which was a whole window, a window that allowed Anne to be able to see not only her father's castle, but her sister's glen and the valley town below. As Anne's family grew, she had to expand her home, but she never simply added a new level or a new wing. She would always reconsider the latest discoveries of the Institute and newly available building materials. She made each addition an integral part of the existing structure, and when necessary was willing to change walls and to shift support members to accommodate the new design. Now, in these latter days, storms began to rage across the land. Winds of discontent. An icy cold settled on the land, chilling the body straight to the spirit. A deluge of frustration and disenchantment. The inhabitants of the valley and the hills sought shelter in their homes. Many from the valley went to high ground. Some came to the castle of the Father, but they were only admitted if they would swear allegiance to the Book of Design. Others sought out Chloe, having heard that her home was open to all, and they were graciously received, but they found their scant shelter in a structure built for sunnier times. Some came to the home of Anne, and the townfolk had come to know her by virtue of her visits to the town and had come to respect her, and all were welcomed, though accommodations became somewhat cramped and unusual living arrangements were introduced to the family. The valley and the hills were ravaged by riotous weather. The damage would not have been so extreme except that Shiva, Connor, had demolished an old flood control dam. And the new dam had not been built, had been delayed due to a protest movement under the banner of one of Chloe's poems. And Shiva was caught on foot when the unreasoning floodwaters raced through the valley, and he was never seen again. Although there were rumors that he had been saved by the daughter of a bank owner of a village downstream whom he had subsequently married, that he had adopted the forename of Douglas and become a successful insurance salesman and a chairman of the local Chamber of Commerce. Chloe's home weathered the early stages of the storm, but a nearby passing tornado of passion just ripped it asunder, exposing its inhabitants to nature's most ferocious elements. Chloe herself was mauled by a she-bear that came rushing out of the forest seeking its young. Chloe was carried by her few surviving companions to the father's castle. Anne's home withstood the onslaught, but not without damage. The great window was smashed by flying debris. Some of those gathered with her were injured, but none seriously. The storm rolled over her home, finding no wall that presented an absolute resistance. The strong yet resilient materials absorbed most of the force of the storm, and like grasses of the field, they bent but did not break. The father's castle, however, had strong walls, but no flexibility. The facades quickly fell away with the first strong gusts of wind. The first small cracks appeared in the walls, and then leaks Then plaster began to fall from the ceilings as the ancient tiles from the roof blew away. The great towers began to collapse, and then the farthest wings, and then finally the great hall fell in upon itself. Most managed to escape serious injury, though there was many scrapes and bruises and a few broken bones. The patriarch of the family was struck in the head by a piece of stone blown from a wall and suffered a concussion. And Alexander's leg was broken when he rushed into the great hall to save the Book of Design and was caught under a falling beam. Following the storm, Anne made her way to what was left of the castle of her father. She found him and Alexander huddled together with the rest of the family. She urged them to come with her to her home and to join the valley folk in rebuilding their town. But her pleas fell upon deaf ears. In dull and lifeless voices, the castle dwellers began to chant the plans of the Book of Design as though they were magical incantations that could somehow restore the castle to its previous state of dominance. Anne found Chloe lying alone, abandoned by her companions, softly singing melancholy songs about betrayal and disillusionment. Anne washed Chloe's wounds and formed a litter and placed her sister upon it. She left her father and her brother as they sang lost songs in the dark. She took Chloe to her home where she could be nursed back to health, though it was not entirely clear that Chloe's scars would ever completely fade away. Anne herself descended to the valley town and began to help those who were already beginning to clear away the devastation. From her own storeroom, she brought building materials and plans, including the Book of Design. She joined with those who were weathered the storm in an effort to rebuild their community. As they met in the last chill of that early morning to plan a new city, the skies began to brighten with the dawn of a new day. Those who have ears to hear, let them hear.